had always loved the peace of car camping. My favorite spot was a remote campsite deep in the woods, far from anyone else. This time, I decided to spend a weekend alone there, hoping for some quiet time to myself. The first night was fine. I set up my tent, made a campfire, and cooked a simple meal. As the sun set and the sky turned dark, I crawled into my sleeping bag, listening to the soothing sounds of the forest. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly, startled by a strange sound. It was faint but kept going, a rhythmic tapping, like someone lightly hitting a surface. I looked at my watch. It was 1:30 a.m. The noise seemed to be coming from outside my car. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the wind, but it didn't stop. I grabbed my flashlight and looked through the tent windows. The light barely cut through the dark, but I didn't see anything. Still, the tapping went on. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was messing with my car. My car was parked a few feet from the tent, so I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped outside. The night air was cold and still. I walked over to the car, my flashlight scanning the vehicle. Everything seemed okay at first, but then I saw something disturbing. The door handle was covered in dirt, like someone had tried to open it recently. I checked the car carefully. Everything seemed in place, but the uneasy feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. I locked the car and went back to the tent, trying to push away the growing sense of fear. I told myself it was probably just an animal, though the thought did little to comfort me. The rest of the night was fitful. I kept hearing noises that I couldn't quite place. When morning finally came, I was relieved. I decided to pack up and leave the campsite as soon as possible. While I was packing up, I noticed a small, shiny object on the ground near my car. It was a car key, definitely not mine. My heart raced. Someone had been out here, probably trying to break into my car. The fact that I hadn't heard anything else showed how careful the intruder had been. I packed up quickly and drove away, every little noise making me jump. Back in the safety of a nearby town, I had my car checked out. Everything seemed okay, but I couldn't shake the fear. The image of that car key on the ground haunted me. It was a chilling reminder of how close I had come to something dangerous. The key wasn't just a sign of a potential break-in. It meant that someone else had been close, maybe watching me while I slept. The thought of a stranger lurking in the woods, waiting for the right moment, made my skin crawl. I couldn't escape the feeling that they might still be out there, waiting for another chance. I had left the army a few months ago, and camping became my way to handle the quiet. I found a spot far from anywhere, right outside a big forest. It felt perfect. No people, no noise, just me, my car, and miles of trees around me. I parked on a dirt road, far enough in that no one would see me. The sun was going down, stretching shadows across the thick woods. I liked this time of day the most, watching the light slowly disappear as everything got quiet. It reminded me of the calm right before things kicked off during missions. I set up my sleeping bag in the back of my car. The forest felt thick, like it was closing in, but it didn't bother me. I'd slept in worse places, surrounded by worse things. As the night went on, the wind started to pick up. It shook the branches above, but I stayed in the car, with the doors locked and my gear beside me. That's when I heard something soft brushing against the side of the car. It was a quiet, dragging sound, like something sliding along the metal. I sat up and looked out the window. My heart started racing, but I told myself it was just an animal. There were plenty around here. I leaned closer to get a better look. The dark outside felt thicker than it should. I couldn't see much past a few feet. My flashlight's beam bounced off the trees, making shadows twist and move in weird ways. Then the sound came again, this time from the back of the car. It was slow, like nails dragging along the side. I froze. Something wasn't right. Animals don't move like that. I stayed still for a few moments, listening. The wind had stopped, and everything was completely quiet. No leaves moving, no animals around, just silence. Suddenly, the car shifted, just a little, like something heavy leaned against it. My mind raced through what it could be. Maybe a tree branch fell or a big animal bumped into it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. I stayed low, barely moving, just looking out the window. Nothing outside, just the still, empty night. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something. A figure, standing a little way from the car, near the trees. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. My pulse shot up, that sharp focus from the army kicking in. I had no idea how long it had been there or how long it had been watching me. But I knew one thing for sure, it wasn't an animal. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. I hardly even breathed, just sat there in my car, staring at the figure. Then, as fast as it showed up, it was gone. No movement, no sound, just gone. Even after it disappeared, I didn't relax. I stayed up all night, clutching my gear, eyes glued to the windows, watching the dark. When the first bit of light finally came in the morning, I wasted no time. I started the car and drove out of there without looking back once. I never went camping after that. Something had been out there, something real. I don't know who or what it was, but I wasn't imagining it. I still think about those eyes, how they stared right through me. The worst part, every once in a while when I'm alone, I get the same feeling, like something is still watching me, even now. I decided to take my grandmother on a car camping trip one weekend. It was something she used to love when she was younger, and I thought it would be a nice way to let her feel that again. We drove out to a quiet spot in the woods, a place she said she camped at a long time ago. There were no other cars or people around. Just me, her, the trees, and the open sky. The first day was easy. We set up our camp near the car, cooked some food, and sat around watching the sun go down. The forest around us was thick and got darker as the night came, but it didn't feel scary. It actually felt nice being out there, away from everything. I decided to sleep in the car, while my grandmother slept in the small tent we brought. The night was quiet, and I dozed off quickly. A few hours later, though, I woke up suddenly. At first, I didn't know why, but then I heard it. A noise that didn't belong. It wasn't the wind or animals moving through the trees. It was slow but steady, almost like footsteps. I sat up in the car, listening hard. The sound was moving around the car, slow and careful. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, but it didn't sound right. It sounded like someone was walking around us, taking their time. I didn't want to move too much. I kept my eyes on the window, looking out into the dark. There wasn't much light, so I couldn't see far, but I could hear the footsteps getting closer, almost circling around. My heart was pounding. I couldn't stop thinking about my grandmother out there in the tent, just a few feet away. I started feeling sick with worry. Then the footsteps stopped, right next to the tent. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what to do. The car was locked, but that tent wasn't going to stop anyone from getting in. My mind was racing, and I felt panic setting in. Just as I was about to open the car door, I heard it. The sound of the tent's zipper being pulled open slowly. It was quiet, but in the stillness of the night, it might as well have been a scream. I acted on instinct. I slammed my hand down on the car horn, holding it for what felt like forever. The loud noise shattered the silence, echoing through the trees. The zipper sound stopped immediately, and then I heard the footsteps again, moving away from the tent fast. Whoever was out there ran off into the woods, the footsteps fading away. I kept pressing the horn, hoping it would scare off whoever or whatever was out there. I waited, straining to hear anything else, but the footsteps were gone. The forest went quiet again, like nothing had happened. I sat there for a minute, trying to catch my breath, and then rushed out of the car to check on my grandmother. She was still asleep in the tent, completely unaware of what had just happened. I stood there for a moment, looking at the half-open zipper, wondering how close she had come to real danger. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just sat in the car, listening to the silence, waiting for those footsteps to come back. But they didn't. When morning came, I didn't say anything to my grandmother. I told her I wasn't feeling well, and we packed up early. As we drove away, I kept thinking about the night before. I replayed every sound in my head, especially those footsteps. Whoever was out there, they weren't in a hurry at first. They took their time walking around us, waiting for the right moment. As we left the woods behind, a thought hit me that I couldn't shake. Whoever it was out there, they weren't trying to steal anything. They weren't even trying to scare us off. They were waiting for something. They knew we were there alone and they were watching us. I had been driving for hours, and as the sun started to go down, I figured it was time to pull over and camp for the night. I had my SUV set up for sleeping in the back, so I found a quiet spot off a dirt road, deep in the woods. There wasn't a car or person anywhere, just trees and the sound of the wind moving through the branches. At first, it felt peaceful. I opened the back of the SUV and watched the stars slowly fill the sky. After eating a quick meal, I climbed into my sleeping bag and shut the hatch. The quiet outside felt calming, with just the occasional sound of bugs and the breeze moving the leaves. Sometime in the night, something woke me up. I couldn't tell what it was at first. Maybe the wind or a branch snapping. I stayed completely still, trying to listen, but it was silent now. That's when I realized something didn't feel right. It was that strange feeling you get when you're not alone. I tried to ignore it, thinking I was just being paranoid. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. I shifted around in my sleeping bag, trying to settle down, when I heard it, a quiet crunching sound. Footsteps. My heart started pounding, and I sat up, looking out the windows into the dark. I couldn't see anything, but the footsteps kept coming, slow and steady. It wasn't an animal. It sounded too careful, too deliberate. I grabbed the flashlight next to me but hesitated. I wasn't sure if I should turn it on. What if they saw me? The footsteps were getting closer, though, and the silence was unbearable. I flicked the light on and pointed it out the window, scanning the area. Nothing. I turned the light off and sat there in the dark again, hoping whatever it was would go away. The footsteps stopped, but I could still feel it, like someone was standing just outside, watching. Minutes passed, and I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. I laid back down, but I couldn't sleep. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a door handle being pulled, soft but clear. My whole body went rigid. Someone was trying to open my car door. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then another handle was pulled on the passenger side. And then nothing. I stayed completely still, listening for any more sounds. But there was only silence. The quiet had turned heavy, and I knew whoever had been out there was still close by. They weren't gone. They were just waiting. Hours dragged on, and at some point, I heard a car engine in the distance. Headlights cut through the trees, lighting up the road for a few seconds. In that brief moment, I saw him. A man was standing just a few feet from my car, staring straight at me through the window. Before I could react, the lights moved on, leaving everything dark again. I sat up quickly, my heart racing, but when I looked back out the window, he was gone. I scanned the area over and over, but there was no sign of him. I stayed awake until the sun came up, too scared to even close my eyes. As soon as the light hit the trees, I packed up and got out of there as fast as I could. But even now, days later, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there. Maybe he followed me. Maybe he's waiting for me to stop again. I've been too scared to camp since, and now, every time I pull off the road, I wonder if he's watching me, hiding in the trees, waiting for the moment I'm too tired to keep running. I thought a weekend in the woods with just my old Jeep and me would be a nice break from the city noise. I found a quiet spot by a small, hidden lake where I'd camped before. It was peaceful, with only the sound of leaves rustling and the occasional splash from the lake. I set up my camp, started a small fire, and settled down with a book. As night fell, the forest became unusually quiet. The wind had stopped, and there were no animal sounds. I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was just the stillness of the night. I had just finished dinner and was getting ready for bed when I heard something. At first, it was a faint crunching noise coming from the woods. I thought it might be an animal, but the sound got louder and seemed to be getting closer. I got up and looked around my camp, but there was nothing. I went back to my Jeep and locked the doors, starting to feel uneasy. Around midnight, the sound came again, louder and clearly from the direction of my Jeep. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it around, but I still couldn't see anything. I decided to stay awake, sitting in my camp chair with a knife in my hand, straining to hear any more noises. Then I saw something that made my heart race. The top of my Jeep had a thick layer of dust, but there were fresh, muddy handprints on it. They were too big to be mine. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt like I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made me jump. I thought about leaving, but the nearest town was hours away, and my phone had no signal. I did the only thing I could think of. I stayed put and waited. The noises continued through the night, sometimes close, sometimes distant. When the sun started to come up, I saw tire tracks near my camp. Tracks that weren't there when I arrived. I packed up my gear quickly, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The tracks led away from my camp, and seeing them filled me with a mix of fear and relief. I drove back to the city, my mind racing. It wasn't until I was on the main road that I realized I'd been holding my breath. I never camped at that spot again. The idea that someone had been so close, tracking me, left me with a lingering sense of dread. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that whoever was out there is still watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. It's a chilling reminder of how quickly a peaceful escape can turn into a horrifying reality. I decided to go car camping in a small forest close to my town. I'd heard it was peaceful and not many people went there. It seemed perfect. Just me, my car, and some quiet time. That's all I wanted. The day went by without any issues. I parked in a small open spot, ate some snacks, and watched the sun go down. As it got dark, I climbed into the back of my car, left the windows cracked open, and lay down. The forest was calm, with the usual sounds of wind through the trees and leaves moving. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was around midnight when I noticed headlights coming down the dirt road toward me. At first, I thought it might be another camper, but as the car got closer, I saw it was a police car. The car slowed down and stopped right in front of me. My heart started beating faster, but I told myself there was nothing to worry about. I hadn't done anything wrong. The strange part was the officer never got out. The car just sat there with the engine running. The headlights were on full blast, shining directly into my eyes. I sat there, waiting for something to happen. I figured maybe the cop would get out, come over, and ask me what I was doing there. but nothing. Minutes passed, and I started feeling really uneasy. Why wasn't the officer coming over? Why was he just sitting there? It didn't make sense. Maybe he was busy with something else, checking something in the car. But still, the way the car just sat there, not moving, started to freak me out. I looked around, thinking maybe there were more police cars nearby or something else going on. But there was nothing, just that one car and the forest. The headlights were blinding, and I couldn't see much of anything beyond them. Then, without warning, the police car slowly reversed a few feet and drove off down the dirt road. It didn't seem right. Why would the car stop for so long and then just leave like that without saying a word? It made no sense. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was just a patrol or something random. But something inside me told me I should leave. Yet I stayed. Maybe I was trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. About half an hour later, I heard it again. That same sound of a car coming down the road. The police car came back and stopped in the exact same spot, right in front of me. The headlights were back on, brighter than ever, shining right into my car. I felt my whole body tense up. It didn't feel right, not at all. The engine was still running, but nobody got out. The car just sat there. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Something was wrong, and I knew it. Felt like whoever was in that car was watching me. I didn't know why, but I felt like I was being watched by more than just the person inside. There was this heavy feeling in the air, like something else was out there with me, but I couldn't see it. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped into the front seat, started the engine, and decided I was getting out of there. As I backed out of the clearing, the police car still didn't move. It just stayed there, sitting in the same spot, blocking part of the road. I carefully drove around it, barely making it past. When I glanced over as I passed the car, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was no one in the driver's seat. The car was empty. I hit the gas and drove straight home, not stopping once. I kept my eyes on the road the whole way, gripping the steering wheel like my life depended on it. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window and didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I called the local police station just to check if there had been any patrols out in that area. They told me there hadn't been any police cars out there last night. I still don't know what I saw or who or what was in that car. But every now and then, when I'm out late at night, I feel like something's watching me. Like those headlights are just around the corner, waiting for me to be alone again. We had planned a weekend car camping trip, just a couple of hours from the city. My friend and I loaded up our car with a tent, some food, and sleeping bags, ready for a quiet escape. The weather was perfect, warm during the day and a bit chilly at night, just right for a campfire. We chose a spot at the end of a narrow dirt road, far from any busy campsites. We wanted to avoid crowds. The trees towered above us, their branches swaying slightly in the breeze, making soft rustling sounds in the background. As the sun set, we set up our tent and started the fire. Felt peaceful, away from everything. We had dinner, enjoyed the quiet, and let the fire burn down to just glowing embers. After a while, we decided to head to bed, expecting the night to be as calm as the day. A little after midnight, I woke up suddenly. My mind was alert, but my body was heavy from sleep. Something felt off. The air was still, with no breeze through the trees, no crickets chirping, just silence. I lay still, trying to figure out what was making me uneasy. That's when I heard it. A faint crunching of gravel, like someone walking slowly and carefully. I froze, my heart racing. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was too deliberate. I listened as the footsteps moved closer to the car, then stopped briefly near the back, before starting again, circling around the side. I couldn't see anything from inside the tent, but the sound was clear. Someone or something was walking around our camp. The footsteps moved away from the car and toward the tent. They got closer and closer until they stopped right outside. I could hear soft, controlled breaths just on the other side of the thin fabric. Felt like they stood there for hours, not moving. Then, as quietly as they came, the footsteps started moving back toward the car. The gravel crunched again, slower this time, like whoever it was carefully stepping around the camp. I stayed still, not daring to make a sound. After a long stretch of silence, I hoped it was over, that maybe whoever or whatever it was had left. But just as I started to relax, I heard it again. The footsteps weren't leaving, they were coming back. This time, they stopped directly behind the car, lingering there as if waiting for something. I couldn't see anything, just the sound of those slow, deliberate steps pacing around us. The night felt suffocating, with no breeze, no rustle of leaves, just the weight of that eerie presence right outside. I didn't sleep again. I stayed awake, listening, until the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. When the sun finally came up, I rushed out of the tent, desperate to see what had been out there. There was nothing, no sign of anyone, no footprints in the gravel, no traces of disturbance. Everything looked normal, but I knew what I heard. Something had been out there watching us. We packed up quickly, both of us shaken, though we barely spoke. As we drove back, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following us. The road behind was empty, but even now, I can't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was out there is still lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I can still hear those footsteps sometimes, echoing in my mind, a constant reminder that we were not alone that night.